Number 10, the Plutonian. If you're familiar with the Irredeemable series, then you will likely already know why I put it so low on the list today, but if you're not, that's no worries. This entire storyline is about the Plutonian, the supposed strongest hero ever to exist, and is all about a superhero snapping and losing control. Very little is known about the Plutonian, even by the people who are supposed to be very close with him, but he draws a lot of parallels with Superman, as he has a Fortress of Solitude-like hideout in a volcano, and not to mention his powers are basically the same with a few more sprinkled in there for fun. Mark Waid, the writer, argues that not all superheroes are mentally equipped to deal with the power and responsibility of being a superhero, so it's bound to happen that one would lose it and just go completely mental. This story follows the Plutonian as he slaughters the people of Earth and all of his former friends, family, and allies. The comic evolves into making the Plutonian a supervillain, or at least shows him in the early stages of it. He's a hero on the edge of losing complete control, and it does a great job of showing how others are meant to deal with the mess that he creates. I highly recommend you check out Boom Studios' Irredeemable series. It has a total of 37 issues, and it really is a great read. Number 9, Green Lantern. The specific Green Lantern that I'll be talking about is Hal Jordan after his home was destroyed in 1992 to 1993's Death of Superman's storyline. At one point during the story, Coast City was destroyed by Mongol, and Hal was not very happy about that, to say the least. To try and resurrect the city back to its former glory, Hal attempts to use the power of his Green Lantern ring, but its power is revoked before he can make it permanent. Consumed by grief and anger, he ends up becoming the villain Parallax and goes on a mass killing spree, killing almost all of the other Green Lanterns so he could take their rings and absorb their power. It ended up getting to the point where Hal was so powerful that he was one of the most feared superheroes in the galaxy, and to date, this is considered to be one of the most strongest iterations of the character. And even though it's not really his fault since he was under the control of Parallax, you'd still think that his strong will would at least have tried to resist the temptation, but alas, that wasn't the case. Why not give this story a read for yourself so you can see just how strong Hal became by starting with 1992's Superman, The Man of Steel, Volume 1, number 18.
Up next at 8, Lady Deathstrike. Let's shift from on-panel to on-screen for this number, and take a look at the battle between Lady Deathstrike and Wolverine that occurred in the X2 movie back in the early 2000s. Released in 2003, X2, X-Men United is a film based off of the God Loves, Man Kills graphic novel, with William Stryker leading an assault on the X-Mansion in order to build his own version of Cerebro and cause a mutant genocide. Now, Lady Deathstrike is controlled by Stryker, acting as his bodyguard of sorts, and towards the end of the film, Wolverine and Deathstrike battle. Logan injects her with molten adamantium, and it's not pretty. While he's never murdered her in the comics, Wolverine has fought her plenty of times, with the two of them having quite the complicated history with one another. In at 7, Omega Red. Omega Red is an X-Men supervillain who first debuted in 1992 in X-Men Volume 2, Issue 4. A serial killer in Russia who was captured and then turned over to the KGB, he underwent experiments in an attempt to recreate a super soldier the likes of Captain America, but Soviet. The result was Omega Red, who has carbonadium retractable tentacles that are housed within his arms, a regenerative healing factor, and an ability to absorb others' life forces. He also has super strength, speed, agility, durability, all that jazz, and an ability to secrete pheromones that result in sickness and death. Yikes for that last one. Omega Red is one of Logan's most enduring villains, and once upon a time, Logan straight up murdered him, also using the Murasama blade. Useful tool. The two fought for nearly 18 hours initially before Omega Red bested Logan, which caused the mutant to go after him out of revenge using the Murasama blade, stabbing him right through the heart. In at 6, Daken. Nothing like murdering your own son, am I right? Yeah? No? Well, that is actually something Wolverine has done, and his son Daken was no pushover either. Daken was not raised by Wolverine, but instead by Romulus, and has all the powers and strengths of Daddy Dearest, but with zero moral code. The two eventually duke it out, with Logan feeling the need to end his son in order to prevent any more harm. But it's not easy for him. And as he kills his offspring, his mind ventures into happier fantasies, which is really tragic. Like watching his son go to prom, and family moments like sitting around a campfire roasting marshmallows. Oh, I can't. The reality is much harsher. He drowns Daken with the young man dying in his arms. Up next at 5, all of the X-Men. From Old Man Logan. This one is a little dark, as if drowning his own son wasn't. So once upon a time in the Old Man Logan series that takes place in the alternate universe of Earth 807128, the world's supervillains took over, largely slaughtering most of the superheroes on the planet. And in the process of this conflict, Mysterio created an illusion to trick Logan into thinking that the X-Men were actually villains, luring him into battle and ultimately resulting in him unintentionally slaughtering all of them. After the illusion was lifted, Logan was filled with grief, ran into the woods, and tried to commit suicide. When that failed, he swore to never pop his claws again, leaving his past life behind. While the X-Men definitely weren't expecting to be taken out by a fellow teammate, it does go to show how strong Wolverine is if he was able to kill all of them. I mean, sure, he had the element of surprise, but it's not like he didn't have any resistance from them whatsoever in battle. On the flip side of that, let's move on to number 4, all of the villains. In Horsemen of War, we see a reverse of our previous number. Rather than killing all of his teammates, Logan takes on every single villain of the X-Men's and kills them. Homicide, it's a common theme on this list. This is a product of a what-if story in which the hypothetical explored is what if Wolverine was transformed into a Horseman of War by Apocalypse? The answer is pretty dark. Wolverine becomes the ultimate threat, not only killing Apocalypse himself, but going on a murderous spree in which he knocks off every known criminal and villain. His victims include Magneto, Mr. Sinister, Sabretooth, Mystique, Juggernaut, and more. Because of this massacre, the rest of the world got so concerned that governments actually started to hunt him down. But they didn't need to be that concerned after all. After completing his goal, Wolverine ended up going into hiding, becoming a monk at a monastery under the name of Brother Xavier. Next up at number 3, himself. There's no greater battle than the one you have with yourself. Or at least, you can expect it to be one hell of a tough one if you're as strong as Wolverine is. The 616 Wolverine fought an alternate version of himself from Earth 61112, the Age of Ultron timeline. Now in that future timeline, Ultron has taken over the world and Wolverine, along with Sue Storm, is sent back to kill Hank Pym to prevent it. Hank being the man who created Ultron in the comics. Now once they've done that, they return to their own timeline only to discover that it has radically altered it for the worst. With Hank dead, the Kree-Skrull conflict spread to Earth and created more devastation. They end up encountering the Defenders in this timeline and Wolverine ends up fighting himself, with the time-traveling Logan killing himself in the brawl. In at number 2, Magneto. Magneto generally has the upper hand against Wolverine. Logan's skeleton is plated with adamantium after all, which is metal. Magneto even once ripped it from his bones in one of the most disturbing attacks on an X-Men member in history. But Wolverine has gotten his day in the sun as far as the Master of Magnetism is concerned. In the Uncanny X-Men arc, Eve of Destruction, Magneto is thwarted by the X-Men team, and when he tries to make peace with them, Logan decided to take the opposite route, not falling for his tricks. He impales him with his claws, and the team leave Magneto on the ground, bleeding out. They also have a drink afterwards too, which kind of feels weird because it's like, hey, we just left a dude to bleed on the ground, but it was Magneto, so... And last but not least, in our number 1 spot, Jean Grey. In X-Men Phoenix and Song, Jean Grey is so overcome with the Phoenix Force that she's no longer able to control it. She's unable to rid herself of it, and she's become an all-powerful antagonistic force, threatening the universe itself. Rather than become the Dark Phoenix again, she ends up turning to someone outside of herself for help. That someone is Logan. And he does her bidding. He ends up driving his claws through her body multiple times in order to kill her, despite the amount of internal pain this causes him. This even played out in X-Men The Last Stand on the big screen in the film adaptation. And in all forms, it's a pretty tragic moment.
Number 10, Sauron. While Sauron might not be the most conventional of mutants in the sense that he wasn't born a mutant, he was mutated from a human to Pteranodon, after suffering an attack from gigantic pteranodons who escaped the Savage Land. Their bites transformed him so that not only did he now resemble them, but he also found he had the ability and need to feed and drain on the life force energy of others to survive. I think he found that out through his dog too, which is sad. No, not the dog. So while not immune in the same way that the X-Men are, being heavily mutated, I think we can count him as a mutant for the purpose of this list. Spider-Man and his team of X-Men classmates ended up teaming up and defeating Sauron in Spider-Man and the X-Men. And yeah, you heard me right. There is a miniseries where Spider-Man joins the X-Men and is put in charge of a class. Even though he's not quite a mutant, but he's a mutate, so I guess it's fine. Number 9, Deadpool. Speaking of mutates, these two have crossed paths quite a few times now, although I'm still waiting for that MCU team up for them. Come on, Marvel, Disney, make this happen for us. It needs to be a thing. But while Deadpool is usually seen as a huge Spidey fan, and Spider-Man for the most part tries to be good about tolerating Deadpool's ridiculous behavior, and sometimes he's actually even a fan of him too, in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, Spider-Man gets pulled into Deadpool's zany world to battle. In Deadpool's reality-warping mind, Spider-Man becomes just a whale and Deadpool the harpooner that is hunting him with puns. That's right, this actually leads to a pun-off full of verbal insults and zingers, which ends with Spider-Man defeating him by throwing the figurative and literal book at him, the Book of Morality. Nothing knocks out Deadpool like smacking him with the hard and hefty weight of responsibility. And yeah, like I said, I know Deadpool isn't really a full mutant and is considered a mutate, but I was willing to consider him an honorable mutant for this list because I just can't resist an opportunity to talk about Spider-Man and Deadpool's relationship in a video. The bromance is so strong between them.
In at number 8, Thor. The God of Thunder lost his arm. That was a thing that happened in the aftermath of Original Sin. Now, at the time, Thor had become unworthy of wielding Mjolnir, so he substitutes it in the meantime for an axe called Jarnborn, which was all fine and dandy until Malekith the Accursed shows up, fights him, and then slices off his arm with his own weapon. Thor is then left to die at the bottom of the ocean. Eventually, though, he would return with a metal arm, while the female Jane Foster Thor wielded the hammer in the meantime. Moving on to number 7, Red Arrow. Red Arrow's loss of his right arm was particularly brutal and gory. In 2009's Justice League Cry for Justice miniseries, Green Arrow teamed up with Green Lantern to create a proactive team to hunt down criminals before they committed their crimes. Very Minority Report meets Civil War II of them. And similar to both of those narratives, precognitive crime prevention just didn't cut it. But Roy Harper's arm did, ba-dum-bum-tsh. In this case, Prometheus infiltrates the League pretending to be Shazam, and when Harper finds out, Prometheus cuts off his arm. If that wasn't bad enough, after Roy comes to in the hospital, he finds out that his daughter and his city were also blown up while he was passed out. Not a good day for Roy Harper. In at 6, Red Tornado. Created in 1968, the Red Tornado is a sentient android with superhuman strength and durability, and can create cyclone-force winds, allowing him to fly, enhance his speed, create storms, etc. Now, in Justice League of America, Red Tornado's soul is tricked into entering the body of a human instead of his android body. He ends up crossing paths with an intelligent Solomon Grundy, who then beats the crap out of him and tears him limb from limb. Grundy then leaves him to bleed out. Luckily for Red Tornado, the Justice League get there just as he's dying, and Zatanna uses her magic to return him to his android body. Still, the image of Grundy ripping off his mortal flesh, revealing raw bone, is something that we can't forget. But apparently DC can, because they've retconned the character entirely out of existence since the New 52, so there you have it. In at 5, Atom Eve. Departing from DC and Marvel for this number, let's take a look at Atom Eve from Invincible. Atom Eve is Samantha Eve Wilkins, a superhero who began her career as a teenager and eventually got hitched to Mark Grayson, aka Invincible, the title character. That marriage put a bit of a target on her back, with her being the aim of multiple villains' attempts to get to her husband. She was once killed by Viltrumite, but resurrected herself. During a battle between Mark and a former teammate called Robot, Robot rips off Eve's leg. She's pregnant when that happens too. Despite it being a very gruesome moment, she ended up getting a prosthetic leg, made from Viltrumite technology. In at 4, Wolverine. Straying a little from the norm here at this number. So, Wolverine has lost his hand a whole lot, but not in the 616 continuity, in alternate universes. Let's start off with the Wolverine known as Weapon X in the Age of Apocalypse universe, Earth 295. Now, he's missing a hand thanks to Cyclops, who is also missing an eye thanks to Wolverine. Cyclops is evil in this universe, and Logan is married to Jean Grey, so more fuel for their fire. Then there's the Logan of the Marvel Mangaverse, who has one hand with adamantium claws and another with laser claws. This is thanks to a battle that he had with his brother in this universe, Cyclops, who cut off his hand. But he got revenge in this universe too. An eye for a claw, people. To add insult to injury, or I guess more injury to injury we suppose, Logan was also ripped in half by the Hulk in the Ultimate Universe. It was not a good moment for him, clearly. In at number 3, Cyborg. Cyborg Victor Stone first debuted in 1980's DC Comics Presents issue 26. The son of scientist Silas Stone, his initial origin story featured him falling victim to a failed experiment in which his body needed to be rebuilt by Daddy Dearest in order to keep him alive. In the New 52, this origin was revised. He became Cyborg when a mother box blew up in front of him during Darkseid's invasion of Earth. Half his body is destroyed, and his own body is trying to kill the rest of him, but his father saves him with Star Labs technology. Moving on to our number 2 spot, Bucky Barnes. When we were first introduced to James Buchanan Bucky Barnes, he was the army brat turned young sidekick for Captain America, first seen in Captain America Comics issue 1 back in March of 1941. After a fateful mission in which Cap and Bucky attempted to stop an experimental drone plane of Baron Zemos, with an explosive on it of course, Steve is launched into the sea where he's frozen in suspended animation until found by the Avengers years later. and Bucky is presumed dead. Turns out he wasn't though. He was found by the Soviets, his body cold preserved with the exception of his left arm, which was severed from his body in the explosion, presumably. That arm would become a notable trait of Bucky's moving forward as he would be revealed to be the Winter Soldier, a foe for Cap at first, but then an ally. And last but definitely not least, in at number 1, Aquaman. When we think of a superhero losing a limb, often the first one who comes to mind is Aquaman, perhaps because he's lost his limbs more than once. The same limb more than once. Come on, Aquaman. Aquaman Arthur Curry has had a bit of a troubled past from a publishing standpoint. Largely thanks to his Silver Age wackiness and portrayal in the animated series Super Friends, Aquaman has long been the butt of many jokes. He talks to fish. He rides on seahorses. You can see why DC has been so adamant on trying to make Arthur a little less campy and a little more cool. One of those attempts was in the 90s when Peter David was writing for The King of Atlantis. In Aquaman issue 2 in 1994, a villain called Charybdis absorbed Aquaman's ability to communicate with sea life and then shoved Aquaman's hand in piranha-infested waters. That's kind of a low blow. The result? Well, Aquaman lost his hand. His hand would be replaced with a harpoon because, water-themed of course, and he would eventually get a mystical replacement too called the Water-Bearer Hand, made for him by the Lady of the Lake. Years later, after he was killed and resurrected, he ended up losing that hand yet again when fighting Black Manta. But after Brightest Day, he ended up becoming a water elemental and got his hand back that way. So I guess that's a good thing. Still, to lose the same hand twice, it's gotta hurt, emotionally. Definitely emotionally. Doesn't do much for the confidence. Starting us off in at number 10, U.S. Agent. U.S. Agent, aka John Walker, first hit the scene in 1986 as Super Patriot, a cocky antagonist of Steve Rogers. Later, he would claim Captain America's mantle after Rogers felt he was no longer advocating in the best interest of the American people, and had become tied down to a political agenda. John Walker didn't care as much about those things. Eventually, in 1989, when the true Cap came back, Walker would become U.S. Agent. He decided to show off his patriotism and joined the fight against Norman Osborn in the Siege event, and in Mighty Avengers issue 36, he tried to stop the Thunderbolts from stealing Odin's spear. In the process, he got his left arm and left leg chopped off with the weapon courtesy of Nuke. Moving on to number 9, Risk. The whole Superboy Prime evil freakout is an iconic one, and also rather silly in many respects. Regardless of your opinion on it, one thing is for certain. Risk got maimed, and it was pretty darn nasty. In Infinite Crisis 4, Superboy Prime goes on a rampage and ends up killing a slew of heroes. And he also maims a bunch of them too, including prior Teen Titans member Risk, aka Cody Driscoll. It's a brief moment, but we do see his whole arm sliced off of his body thanks to Superboy's heat vision. Later, in Teen Titans issue 32, we learned that Cody almost bled out because of it.
Number 8. Ant-Man. The specific series that I'll be talking about for Ant-Man is the Ultimatum series that ran in 2016, and yes, I know that it's not considered canon by many people, but we're not talking canon, we're talking about losing control, and that's exactly what happened to Ant-Man in this twisted storyline. Within the first 5 pages of the first issue, everything goes terribly wrong as out of nowhere the sky darkens and all of Manhattan is flooded, and many of our heroes are submerged underwater. Some are lucky enough to resurface, but unfortunately Janet Van Dyne, aka the Wasp, drowned and Hank was unable to find her no matter how hard he tried. Following the tidal wave and in the second issue after the water had cleared, we see the entire city of Manhattan in shambles and overrun with criminals doing their thing, and this is exactly when we see Ant-Man and Hawkeye come across the villain the Blob as he's feasting on Janet's body. This obviously did not sit well with Hank, so standing at about 60 stories tall as Giant Man, he just picks up the Blob, states that he is not going to play around with him, and then straight up just bites his head off and spits it out on the ground. The loss of a loved one can really push people to do some crazy things, and apparently it can push a hero to the point of murder. Check out this storyline for yourself, or feel free to skip ahead to issue 3, where this gruesome scene takes place. Number 7. Daredevil. In 2003's Daredevil Volume 2 number 49, we get to see a side of Daredevil that we rarely get to see. Obviously, Matt Murdock has gone off the rails a few times and flipped out thanks to his bad temper, but man, this was different. In this issue, we see Bullseye show up at Matt's place after he's already killed Karen Page and Elektra, just to kill another one of his girlfriends, and upon his arrival, Matt immediately throws him out a window and begins the beatdown of a lifetime. He took so much joy from beating the villain and mocking the Bullseye tattoo on his forehead, and just to really bring home the rage and get his point across, Daredevil grabbed a rock from the ground and carved the bullseye into the villain's forehead, making it even more permanent than it already was by forever scarring it. It's not even the action that's so insane, because, like I said, with Ant-Man, the loss of a loved one can really lead you to do some pretty crazy things, but it's his reaction afterward, just smiling ear to ear, biggest grin you've ever seen in your life. Give this issue a read for yourself to see how truly merciless DD can really be, because man, saying I was surprised is truly an understatement. Number 6, Cyclops. Scott Summers has always had trouble controlling his powers, that's no secret, but during the events of 2012's Avengers vs. X-Men, it only got worse. In this 12-issue storyline, we see the Phoenix Force get fragmented and inhabit 5 prominent characters in the X-Men universe: Cyclops, Emma Frost, Colossus, Magic, and Namor, and the whole storyline basically watches the Avengers and the X-Men do their best to take down the Phoenix Force. In issue 11, we saw a crazed Phoenix Force-powered Cyclops lose himself to his newfound thirst for power. The issue ended with a big showdown between Cyclops and his mentor, Professor Xavier. Xavier tried to convince his surrogate son to relinquish the powers and come back to the good side, but Cyclops resisted and instead embraced the full power of the Phoenix and killed Charles Xavier. This was such a shocking moment because Scott is normally so level-headed and controlled, and to see him so power-hungry and full of rage is a side of him I never thought we would see. It can be argued that it wasn't his fault since he wasn't the mastermind behind everything, but he is still the one who lost control and snapped, so he has to deal with what he did. Number 5, Green Arrow. Another character who is usually pretty good at keeping his cool, however, in 2010's Justice League Cry for Justice storyline, his patience and control are pushed to their absolute limits, and needless to say, he did not deal with the pressure too well. This is all thanks to Prometheus, a villain determined to attack superheroes and hit them where it hurts the most. In this story, the Red Arrow had his arm completely ripped off, and then his daughter was crushed as part of Prometheus' plan. This really pissed off the Green Arrow, but he decided to let Prometheus go after he'd been captured, and it seemed like, for a time, that the Green Arrow had kept his emotions in check. But then the scene shifted to Prometheus' lair, and we saw that was not the case, even in the slightest. Prometheus heard a noise behind him, and when he turned to investigate, he saw that Green Arrow had come to pay him a little visit. After a very brief discussion, the Green Arrow shoots an arrow straight into Prometheus' forehead, sticking him to the wall and killing him, stating that Prometheus never knew that at his core, Green Arrow wasn't a hero. He was a hunter. Check this storyline out for yourself and let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I personally love Green Arrow, and I think this ruthless side of him is pretty freaking sweet. Number 4, Spider-Man. Back in Black, a great AC/DC song, but also a Spider-Man storyline that ran in 2007. After a sniper's bullet changes everything for Peter Parker and his life, he dons his infamous black costume once more. From then on, Spider-Man would stop at nothing to find the man who pulled the trigger and, even more important, the man who gave the order to kill. This is truly Spider-Man at his darkest hour. Now, I realize that was probably a little bit vague, so I'll just tell you straight up. Aunt May is the one who was shot, and this caused Peter to go off the rails. He tracked down everyone involved with the shooting and found that it all led to the Kingpin. He found the Kingpin in prison and he beat the living daylights out of him. He beat him within an inch of his life and then promised to kill him if Aunt May was to actually die. After he beat him to a pulp and got Fisk really scared, Peter decided to let him live with the shame of being handily beaten by a guy half his size in front of literally everyone in prison. Certainly surprising that the joke-filled webhead could be so ruthless, but I don't know, can you really blame him? Give this storyline a read for yourself by checking out 2007's Amazing Spider-Man number 539 to 543. Number 3, The Hulk. You always have to include the Hulk on any list that involved a hero losing control because, like, you know, it's the Hulk, it's kind of his thing. In World War Hulk, the sequel to Planet Hulk, the Hulk is married to Kara and they have a child on the way. After he is tricked by the Illuminati and sent into space with her, their spaceship exploded and she and the unborn child were unfortunately killed. Now, we all know that the Hulk has a very bad temper during the best of times, so you can only imagine what this tragedy did to him. I feel like I don't need to say it, but I will anyways. He went absolutely insane. He traveled from place to place, smashing everyone and everything in his path, and he single-handedly destroyed so many different superheroes that I won't even start to list them because I would be here for hours. Eventually his rage grows to such an extreme that the radiation threatens the entire Earth and he is taken down to save the planet. Even if you consider how grouchy the Hulk is and how often he loses it, this is entirely a different level for him. Give the story a read for yourself, starting with 2007's World War Hulk Prologue World Breaker Volume 1. Number 2, Wolverine. You probably know what I'm going to be talking about if you're a fan of the X-Men series when it comes to Wolverine. In the Wolverine Old Man Logan storyline, we get to see the vicious side of Wolverine that we have all come to know and love. However, this time it wasn't necessarily his fault. So basically it's the future and Logan is now an old man, and he hasn't used the Wolverine persona or his claws since this mysterious night in the past when a bunch of villains supposedly attacked. We learned through some flashbacks that a massive group of 40 supervillains attacked the X-Men mansion, and during this attack, Wolverine gets in touch with his primal side and goes absolutely crazy and kills every single one of them. After the fight and the intense slaughter, things change and Wolverine realizes it was all just an illusion. The entire time, Wolverine had his vision and mind altered by Mysterio, and all the villains that he killed in combat were actually his fellow X-Men. This destroyed Logan, and he decided to retire his Wolverine mantle after that, essentially killing that part of him so he would never do something like that again. It's definitely a very sad way to end a run as a hero, but I see why he felt that was necessary. Give this a read for yourself, starting with 2018's Old Man Logan, Volume 1, Number 1, and while you're at it, why not rewatch the movie Logan and see if you can, I don't know, draw any comparison. Number 1, Tara. If you're like me, then your first introduction to Tara was probably through the Teen Titans TV show, and man, I always remember thinking how cool of a character she was, and in the specific issue that I'm going to be talking about today, we get to see exactly how crazy strong she can be. The Dark Multiverse Teen Titans The Judas Contract reimagines one of the most renowned stories in comic book history, The Judas Contract. In this reimagining, Tara's betrayal starts with not the Teen Titans, but with Deathstroke himself. Now free from her mentor's influence and supercharged by the same serum that turned Slade Wilson into the world's deadliest man, Tara works to forge a new destiny written in the Teen Titans' blood. Now calling herself Gaia and viewing herself as a literal goddess, she changed her costume and attacked the Teen Titans Tower, killing Raven, Starfire, Wonder Girl, and Cyborg before battling against Robin and Kid Flash, who she was also able to overpower and kill.
Coming in at number 10, we have Quicksilver, the speedster that both Fox and Disney were throwing into the movies, which had a lot of comic fans confused. Like, how many nerds out there had to explain to their friends why the same character was in 2 movies but played by different people, but they weren't in the same universe? Thankfully, the MCU is now all connected and we don't need to have that conversation again, as long as Sony doesn't try to rip Spider-Man away from us. I couldn't handle that another time. For fans of the X-Men comics, you will be well aware of the House of M storyline. This was one of the most monumental events that has ever happened in the Marvel Universe, and it changed the mutant race forever. Scarlet Witch was going through an immense amount of emotional stress, and she was at her breaking point and decided that she would use her reality-altering powers to reshape the world forever. She called out, "No more humans," and the population of superpowered beings that was in the range of 1.2 million was now pulled down to less than 200. Over 1 million mutants were stripped of their powers, and Quicksilver was along with them. I wonder how it felt experiencing the crushing boredom of traffic for the first time ever in your life. Coming in at number 9, we have the Green Lantern. Hal Jordan has often been used as a representation of the man when it comes to any sort of social issue brought up in the DC universe when he's involved. After all, he is a cop, so it kind of fits the bill for his character. Well, in the 70s, there was a lot going on in the world when it came to American politics, and DC wanted to take this on with Green Lantern and the Green Arrow. They were going down to try and calm the American people. Do you think these two guys became friends just because they both wear green? It was like the easiest form of association. Well, the two of them went down to confront some American miners who were protesting for better wages, and because Hal had been spending so much time on Earth, his ring was feeling a little bit weak. He tried to confront the miners to get them to stop, and in this moment, his ring lost all of its power. Also, the miners were fully locked and loaded with guns, so it was a little bit of a sticky situation.
Number 8, House of M. This 8-part event written by Brian Michael Bendis starts off rather beautiful, dare I say. Wanda Maximoff is giving birth to her new twins. Vision is by her side, and then Xavier's voice just pops in out of nowhere, demanding that Wanda returns the world to normal. She refuses, and she hangs on to her children, and they shatter. The world goes away, and Wanda returns back to the normal world, where she has no twins, but she's in a dark room on Genosha. And he uses his powers to put her back to sleep. Then in comes Magneto, and he asks about his daughter's progress, and Charles is afraid, because at this point, her power is too much to handle. Now in Avengers Tower, the team is discussing on what to do with Wanda. The ideas are getting kind of dark, because they have to. Wolverine is suggesting that they just take out Wanda, just killing her, which is pretty dark. But then when Quicksilver passes on this gossip, Wanda then warps reality into a world called House of M, where mutants were top dogs and Magneto and his family just ruled them all. Other Marvel heroes were given their desires, like Peter was married to Gwen Stacy, Cyclops is married to Emma Frost, and Doctor Strange is a psychologist. The world is completely different, but the only person who remembers real life is Wolverine, the same guy who suggested that they Wanda. Things took a turn and the event became even more stressful when Wanda uttered those 3 words in issue 7. No more mutants. Number 7, Secret Empire. In Avengers Endgame, Steve uses future knowledge to obtain the scepter. He says, "Hail Hydra," Rumlow gives it over, no elevator fight needed. Nice. It was a fun moment in the theater, but the line "Hail Hydra" comes right from the comics, but this time around it's not that entertaining. The last words come from Steve after the Avengers standoff event, where it's revealed he's actually a sleeper agent of Hydra. Another pawn of the Red Skull after all. This was huge news. I mean, fans were really upset. Readers were sending in death threats to the writers. The 2017 series Secret Empire was wild. The team had to go against their own leader Cap, who was trying to take over the government with Hydra, and then eventually run all of the United States. It was crazy. Bad Steve took out Rick Jones, he took out Black Widow. I mean, it's fair, readers were upset, really. This is a nightmare. In the end, it was concluded that Bad Cap was a double and Good Cap was actually locked in the Cosmic Cube. Number 6, Axis. When Red Skull abducted numerous mutants and Inhumans, Magneto tracked him down. Now at the same time, Scarlet Witch, Rogue, and Havoc were captured by Red Skull's S-Men and brought to the island/horror camp. The Avengers escaped and saved Magneto. Magneto gave Red Skull the beatdown of a lifetime. He got caught up in the moment and went a little bit too far, perhaps. Magneto says that he did what had to be done, and he thinks that he saved countless amount of lives. But then Red Onslaught rises to the challenge. Red Skull is reborn. This time he's bigger and badder. The X-Men and Avengers team up to stop Red Onslaught, where a number of heroes inverted. Yeah, their personality and moral compass just totally flipped, which certainly didn't help the situation at all. But the fun part is when our villains also get inverted and they join the Avengers to stop Red Onslaught. So it's a mess. It's a big fun mess. Number 5, Age of Ultron. This one just starts off hot right off the bat. Hawkeye is sneaking into this abandoned building, just taking dudes out slowly. They have Spider-Man captured and he looks terrible. He looks like he just got hit by a freight train. Now in the MCU, Tony and Bruce are the masterminds behind Ultron, but in the comics, it was actually Hank Pym. Ultron made his first debut back in 1968 in Avengers issue 54, and in the comics, Hank Pym was actually the father of Ultron. He actually has the same brain patterns as Hank Pym, because he figured it needed personality, much like our MCU version of Ultron is another personality of Tony Stark's. So cut to the comic event Age of Ultron by Brian Michael Bendis. We see Ultron in all of his glory and it's quite menacing. The world is just trashed. He's from the future and he's here to take over the planet. The death toll reaches billions, including some of our favorite heroes. If you haven't read it, strongly recommend. Much better than the movie Age of Ultron, which was just like the weekend of Ultron, rather. Number 4, Civil War. Okay, the opening scene of Endgame is wild. The remaining heroes, minus Tony Stark, head out into space to take on Thanos, with the help this time of Captain Marvel. They actually sneak up on him and they cut the gauntlet off his arm in like 6 seconds. They kind of win really fast. See, when the Avengers are united and they have a plan, things work out. The other crew in space in Infinity War couldn't even get the gauntlet off of Thanos. Quill was freaking out, the gravity was off, Thanos had the stones. It was tricky, but if Civil War never happened, I fully believe that they would have handled Thanos as a team much sooner. But by the time Thanos begins his quest for the stones, Tony and Steve aren't even on speaking terms. Okay. This all comes down to the events from Captain America Civil War. Now this ends with Tony and Steve fighting it out and Cap drops the shield. Tony blasts off Bucky's arm. It's heartbreaking to say the least, but it's one of my favorite Marvel movies. For some reason. I like watching people lose. I don't know what it is. Number 3, Avengers Disassembled. Brought to us from the mind again of Brian Michael Bendis, Avengers Disassembled is a 5-parter that brings the team together just to be torn apart again. It is a ride. The story begins with the Avengers mansion sensors blasting to warn the team of an intruder. Now the intruder is the Jack of Hearts, who actually died beforehand saving Cassie, Ant-Man's daughter. So what's going on here? Why is he here? Well, Jack blows up, taking half the mansion out with him, along with the life of Ant-Man. That's crazy. And then the Vision crash lands with the Quinjet, starts attacking the rest of the survivors, and then She-Hulk comes out and rips Vision into 2. And then while She-Hulk was going nuts, she accidentally hurt Wasp, Captain America, and Captain Britain. She-Hulk ended up leaving the group because of the guilt inside after she just wreaked havoc. Now this whole event is wild, even before Scarlet Witch is revealed to be behind it all. Spoiler alert. This is when Wanda lost her 2 kids because, well, they weren't actually her 2 kids. They were created from Mephisto, so she was upset. Eventually, she was defeated by Doctor Strange and Magneto took over from there. Now, this is where people, and I, want Wanda to go in the MCU. Perhaps studying the Darkhold and the recent loss of Tommy and Billy, she might make a big bad comeback. Who knows? Number 2, Avengers Red Zone. Avengers Volume 3 Issue 65, titled Avengers Red Zone, is a 6-parter that begins with this mysterious red cloud coming through South Dakota. Oh, this is a nightmare. So it's bringing a plague, basically. It's a red mist of doom. It's kind of like the movie The Mist, but without monsters, although it's just as terrifying. So everybody wears masks, because that's what happens when there's a plague and you don't want to, die. You wear masks. Weird concept, I know. But it's still a war zone. People are dying off fast. Now in comes Captain America and the Avengers to save the day, figure out what's going on. And the team struggles here a lot. They get sick, they get infected, their motivation is just low, their team members are dying off, and things come to a fun turn when Iron Man and Black Panther create a cure. Great, but Iron Man gets trapped by Red Skull come part 6. The team is not looking good at this point. Cap is down, so Tony takes his suit off and exposes himself to the mist in order to give Steve CPR. No sacrifice, no victory. Sam Witwicky. And finally, number 1, Infinity Gauntlet. Coming from the minds of Jim Starlin, George Perez, and Ron Lim, Infinity Gauntlet was released in 1991, and Avengers Infinity War mirrored a lot of what happened from that event. Yes, Thanos wanted to take out half the universe because he wanted to impress Mistress Death this time around. He wanted to be her equal, whereas in the movie, he just wanted to fill people's bellies. The film adaptation was, in my opinion, Marvel's best work. All those characters in one movie, it felt smooth, it didn't feel long, it didn't feel slow at any part. It's kind of great. In the movie, when Thanos is obtaining these gems, he toys with the Avengers in a similar way. In the comic, he turned them into strings and cubes, and then in Infinity War, Drax and Mantis had that happen to them as well. Even in theaters, I was like, this looks familiar, the whole cube thing. There's plenty of other references, it's awesome, and it's hard to make a list about the Avengers losing and not including the time we all paid them over $2 billion to lose. And that was Avengers Infinity War. Thanks, Russo brothers. Killing it. Well guys, there you have it. The Avengers are great for the most part, but sometimes you need to get your ass handed to you in order to make the step up. You gotta lose and then win, it's part of the fun.
And at number 10, Sabretooth. Sabretooth is one of Wolverine's main foes. Both birthed from the Weapon X program, to an extent, the two have clashed numerous times over the years, both on panel and on screen. And while Logan has bested Sabretooth plenty of times, none beats when he straight up decapitated the mutant using the Murasama Blade. Now, the Murasama Blade is a weapon in the Marvel Universe that neutralizes healing powers. Logan used this against Victor Creed to not only slice off his arm, but also to cut off his head. Moving on to number 9, Deadpool. Is Deadpool a mutant? Sometimes he claims to be, sometimes he's not. Regardless of your opinion on this, or what is technically canon, Wade Wilson, also a product of the Weapon X program's experiments, is a very strong foe that has lost to Wolverine in the past. This went down in Cable and Deadpool issue 44, when Wolverine ends up skewering Deadpool to a wall with his claws when the two duke it out at a Hydra base. It's a pretty epic duel, with both heroes doing an impressive job, but turns out that 6 blades are in fact better than 2. Sorry, Deadpool.
Number 8, Angel. These two ran into one another in an issue of Marvel Team-Up Volume 1, issue number 4, featuring Spider-Man and the X-Men. Like most team-ups, this one starts with the X-Men coming to blows with Spider-Man after Professor Xavier reads an article in the newspaper that tells him that a scientist and a former colleague of his has been kidnapped by the masked vigilante Spider-Man. First up is Warren Worthington III, Angel. Understandably, Angel was no match for Spider-Man, who already had practice when it came to flying enemies thanks to his own villain, the Vulture. He has run-ins with the Vulture pretty early on in his own series, so. Webbing combined with his quick reflexes and acrobatics allow him to easily beat Angel in one-on-one combat. So yeah, if you think just because you can fly you're gonna be able to get away, no, no, no. Number 7, Nightcrawler. The first time these two fought, it was an even match, although I will say that Spider-Man, it looked to me that he actually had the upper hand. It also happened in his own series in Amazing Spider-Man issue 161, which bodes well for our web-singing hero should they have actually needed to come to blows and actually have a fight. This was one of those misunderstanding fights, as team-ups usually go. And like most instances of superheroes fighting one another, this of course was just a misunderstanding. Nightcrawler and Spider-Man both thought that the other actually might be a murderer, who they both happened to trying to be tracked down at the same time. And at the end of the issue, the Punisher would actually show up to complicate things further, then he would get involved. The first fight between Nightcrawler and Spider-Man ends with Spider-Man managing to pin Nightcrawler down, but unfortunately Kurt teleports away before Spidey can turn him into the authorities. But we've also seen Spider-Man full-on beat Kurt in a fight that I'm going to dive into later in this list. Don't worry, I'll come back to it. Number 6, Cyclops. You would think that optic blasts beat Spider-Man, right? Like, you could cook a spider with an optic blast, couldn't you? Just blast it apart, or I don't know. Well, you'd be wrong. Cyclops actually has had a few attempts at trying to blast Spider-Man in the comics, but even with his insane level of precision with his optic blast while using his visor, the problem he runs into is he can never actually hit Spider-Man. Spider-Man is simply too agile and always manages to dodge Cyclops' attacks. We also see this in the Marvel team-up issue that I was talking about earlier, issue number 4, and Jean Grey is the one who actually has to step in to get the job done when it comes to capturing Spider-Man, using her telekinesis. And yet, in the same issue, she somehow manages to momentarily get kidnapped by Morbius. She goes from being like the most powerful to being like, oh no, I'm kidnapped. I was like, wait, but can't she just telekinesis Morbius to, I don't know. I'm not writing this, obviously. I'm not writing these old school comics, so it's not up to me. Number 5, Sabretooth. In issue 116 of Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter crosses paths with Sabretooth when he shows up to attack Black Cat, who had just escaped the Foreigner's clutches. Sabretooth was sent to make her pay, and while Felicia doesn't seem to be afraid of Sabretooth's threats to skin her alive, Spider-Man returns just as Victor is set to pounce on her. The two tussle, and Peter leaves Victor crying out when he shoots him in the face with his webbing. Victor rips the webbing off his face, in the process doing damage with his own claws, proving that not only is Spider-Man stronger than Sabretooth this time around, but he seems to be quite a bit smarter too. Like, Victor, you did that to yourself. What you doing? Number 4, Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine have always had a kind of frenemy status, often finding it hard to see eye to eye on things. They've traveled through time and space together, swapped bodies, and been forced to go on all kinds of adventures together. They also both seem to have a thing for MJ, which has gotten Logan into trouble more than once with Peter Parker. In the video game Spider-Man Web of Shadows, however, it's the fact that Wolverine thinks Spider-Man smells off that prompts him to fight him. What Logan is actually smelling is a symbiote within Peter Parker, but still Logan is hesitant to trust Spider-Man, choosing to question him instead, while you as Spider-Man are forced to fight against him. Logan believes that the symbiote has taken control of you. Being, of course, that you are the protagonist in the game, you end up coming on top and convincing Wolverine that you are in fact the real Peter Parker, and that you are the one in control between you and your symbiote, despite what he may or may not smell. You also have to answer a lot of questions during that fight. Number 3, Iceman. Also coming at us from Marvel Team Up is another popular and original member of the X-Men team, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. Spider-Man manages to smash through Iceman's ice slide, making him fall and easily defeating him. Spidey even suggests to Iceman that he and Human Torch should hang out more because both seem to have a lot to learn. Ooh, sick burn, pun intended. And you know, in the 70s, this may actually have been true, as Spider-Man has already proved his mettle at this point by taking on the entire Fantastic Four team as well. Spider-Man just kicks everybody's butt. Number 2, Colossus. Known as being the strongest member of the X-Men, even Colossus was no match for Spider-Man. This fight happened in the Secret Wars series out of the 80s in issue number 3. He takes out Colossus in one panel. Granted, Spider-Man also seems to have the element of surprise on his side here. Professor X has only just managed to warn everyone that he senses Spider-Man while Spider-Man is in the process of dropping in. He defeats Colossus in one panel using his webbing to blind him, because for those of us who are used to seeing, not being able to see, I guess is kind of everybody's weakness. So there you go, blind Colossus and you can defeat him. Number 1, all of the X-Men. And during this fight in Secret Wars, Spider-Man ended up taking on and defeating all of the X-Men as well, at least all of the X-Men that were there at the time. Considering that Peter Parker is known for being friends of quite a few mutants, it might surprise you to hear that he'd even battled the X-Men. But this was during their time on Beyonder's Battle World, where Spider-Man had just overheard them discussing mutant oppression and joining with Magneto. And you know, Magneto's a bad guy. So this just rubbed Spidey the wrong way, and he decided to attack, revealing that he'd heard their plan and he was gonna rat them out. I mean, I get why he attacked them to stop them, but Confessing you're gonna rat them out seems like a bad move. He dodges attacks from Cyclops and Storm, swats Wolverine out of the way with one hand, ties up Rogue and hangs her from a pipe, and sticks Nightcrawler in a spot where his teleportation abilities appear to be disabled. This is the defeat that I was talking about earlier for Kurt, by the way. It was pretty impressive, and at the end of it, he left Logan, if you can believe it, actually remarking how lucky the X-Men were that that was all that Spider-Man had done to them. In his opinion, it could have been way worse. Of course, Xavier did manage to at least wipe Spider-Man's memories of the conversation just as he was getting away, proving that Spider-Man is still no match for a powerful psionic mutant.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Avengers Under Siege. Written by Roger Stern, released in 1987, this is their first big battle after taking on Loki. It's a fan favorite, so I figured I'd start with this one. It began back in Avengers issue 270, when the Avengers were still living in Tony Stark's mansion in New York. It was comfortable until Baron Zemo and the Masters of Evil stormed the mansion. Tigra and Black Knight were injured severely, and Hercules was beaten so hard he went into a coma. And while they still were in for a hot minute, the Masters of Evil destroyed everybody's belongings, including the only photo left of Captain America's mother. That was a pretty sad page. Number 9, Secret Invasion. With Disney announcing all these new Marvel shows, we can start speculating where the plot might go. Like, for example, Secret Invasion was announced, and now Emilia Clarke has signed on to do it, along with Samuel L. Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn, so it's clear some Skrulls are probably going to be in the picture. In the comics, Secret Invasion was an event that took place where Skrulls wanted to take over Earth. They thought it was rightfully theirs, so they're like, yeah, let's do this. So what better way to take over the world than to blend in like one of the greatest heroes on it? So after the Skrulls had experimented on the Illuminati, they put one Skrull secretly in every team in all of these states. So with Sharon Carter making some shady phone calls after she was pardoned in the final credit scene of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I'm betting that she's already secretly a Skrull.
Coming in at number 8, we have Miss Marvel, one of the most super powerful characters in the Marvel Universe. Following a similar space cop motif that Green Lantern uses, it would seem that very few people would be able to stand up to her. I mean, we all remember in Avengers Endgame when she took a headbutt from Thanos without even flinching, but that doesn't mean that she's impervious to any sort of harm, especially when we're talking about harm coming from Rogue. Miss Marvel and Rogue got into a one-on-one conflict that would change the two characters forever. In this clash, Rogue comes in contact with Miss Marvel and uses her vampiric power draining abilities, but she wasn't nice about it. Rogue drained Miss Marvel until she sucked out every last ounce of super powered energy that was inside of her, making Rogue insanely strong and leaving Miss Marvel not that marvelous. Next on the list, we got Superman. Some people would love to see Superman become less powerful just because it might make the character a little bit more interesting, but that's tough to do because so much of the DC universe has been built around his godlike presence. One way that this has been done tastefully was when the New 52 run of Superman introduced a new power. Superman could now perform what would be called a super flare. As many of you know, Superman gets his power from the sun. This solar energy builds up in his body like a smartphone battery charging. On a few occasions, when he comes out of contact with the sun for too long, he will lose his powers and all of his abilities. But with this super flare, he can unleash all that energy stored in his body in one blast like a massive nuke. However, when he does this, he will be without his powers for 24 hours as his body sucks in that good sunlight. Next on the list, we have Storm, one of the coolest comic book characters ever created. I've always been a fan of any hero who has storm powers because there is so much you can do with them. Got a fire? Bring in some rain. Got a big monster? Hit it with some lightning. Got a town that needs clean energy? Build a windmill and then create some wind. But in Uncanny X-Men issue 185, Storm would no longer be the queen of weather. This was because the future mutant Forge worked with Henry Peter Gyrich to come up with a weapon that could be used to neutralize a mutant's powers. See, Gyrich was a little bit peeved because Rogue had recently gotten into a major conflict with S.H.I.E.L.D. This led to Gyrich attempting to depower Rogue with this newly crafted weapon, but a misfire led to it hitting Storm. Right next on the list, we have Bruce Banner. Jason Aaron did one of my favorite runs of the Hulk. There was a short series where this time Hulk gets rid of Banner, not the other way around. The Hulk goes to see Dr. Doom, and Doom genetically grows a Banner clone and then surgically removes the section of Hulk's brain which contains Banner and implants it into this new clone. So now the two can coexist without each other. Hulk actually deals with this very well. He checks out the world and ignores everything that the previous superpowered world would bring to him, but it refuses to leave him alone. Banner eventually goes mad and starts making an island of superpowered Hulk beasts with an attempt to recreate the Hulk in his own body. A team of mad scientist hunters commission the Hulk to work with them to take out the newly insane Banner, and the two sides of the same coin go head on, and that's only in the first few issues. It gets way crazier down the road. Right after Hulk, we have Thor. The Asgardian has always had a lot of family problems. If he's not fighting with his brother, it's with his dad or his sister. On one occasion, Odin thought it was time to teach Thor a tough lesson. Because Thor is insanely powerful, he's always walked around as a brutish thug who wants to punch first and ask questions later. Odin thought it was time that he learned some empathy for those who aren't able to wield a hammer that was made out of a fallen star. So he stripped him of his power and then sent him to Earth. Now Thor might have walked around like an angry kid who wants to have cookies for breakfast, but Odin solved this problem by also wiping his memory. This way Thor would be forced to be a real person and see what it's like to feel and act like a normal person. Of course he eventually got his memory back and returned to the mantle of God of Thunder. Right after that we have Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange lost his powers in one of the coolest, dumbest ways possible. Earth was under attack from the Impericul, which are a futuristic robot race from another dimension. They hate magic and travel through time and space to destroy it in every form. The Impericul came to Earth to battle Doctor Strange, and Strange summoned up all the magic on Earth into his body in an attempt to destroy the Impericul leader, but this failed and left Strange in a weakened state with no magic left on the planet for him to use his powers. Coming in at number 2, we have Wonder Woman. Strength is a cornerstone of this character, and with the loss of her powers, it was shown that she can represent that in more ways than one. In the 70s, Wonder Woman willingly gave up her powers because she sought to follow her heart. If she was to stay the superpowered goddess, it would mean she would have to return to Themyscira and leave behind the heartthrob Steve Trevor. In her newly depowered state, she didn't give up her life of hero work. She went on to study a new martial art, probably making her even more powerful in the long run. I mean, if you can kick someone's butt while you're just regular flesh and blood, then when you pack some superpowered juice into that, you can start knocking people out like 19-year-old Mike Tyson. Part of the change to this character was to coincide with the women's movement that was happening in the 70s. DC Comics wanted to represent a strong female character that could be closer associated to the female readers that were picking up the comic. And for the number 1 spot, we have Wolverine. It would be pretty hard to be Wolverine without the powers. I mean, even take Superman. On a few occasions, he has been stripped of his powers, and he's still that Boy Scout at heart and will do what's right no matter what. But with Wolverine, a big part of his personality is being able to be punched in the face and come back like nothing happened, which probably made the loss of his powers even more interesting. Back in 2013, Wolverine was infected with a very advanced virus that attacked his healing factor. It basically made him so he was just a regular guy. Well, a regular guy that could probably still crank out 100 pull-ups. But this was so severe that he couldn't even use his claws anymore, so he had wrist-mounted claws. I guess you can take the powers out of the Wolverine, but you can't stop him from trying to slice people in half. Now, this level of aggression without the healing factor backing him up eventually led to his death.
Number 10, Silver Samurai. The Silver Samurai and Wolverine have an epic fight with one another in Uncanny X-Men issue 173. Kenichio Harada and Logan have a ton of history, and despite fighting one another a bunch, the two also share a mutual respect for one another. Their fight lasts 3 honestly beautiful pages. Despite Silver Samurai's ability to charge his sword using tachyon energy, making it strong enough to cut through almost anything, his sword remains no match for Wolverine's adamantium claws. Logan ends up victorious after he breaks Harada's arm, forcing the Silver Samurai to be at his mercy. In fact, he would have been killed if not for the interference of Mariko, the Silver Samurai's half-sister, and later, Viper. Number 9, the Mongrels. While we may have talked about Wolverine's famous son, Daken, on the first part of this list, we have yet to highlight how brutally Wolverine beat 5 of his other kids, who were actually originally rounded up by Daken himself. Initially. The Mongrels consist of Sophist, Shadowstalker, Cannonfoot, Fire Knives, and are led by Gunhawk. Wow, those are some names. Cannonfoot is the only one that is actually confirmed a mutant, but I feel like we simply didn't get enough time with the other members of the Mongrels to really learn what their mutant powers were, but I'm sure they had them. One can assume their power sets would at least be somewhat similar to Logan's, had we actually gotten into that. Of course, pitting the Mongrels against their father was all part of a master plan to get back at Wolverine and basically torture him. In fact, they were expected to die. A plan that was executed and orchestrated by Dakin and likely the right hand. Logan killed the group of mutants without knowing that they were actually his own children, and I don't think we really even knew if they knew that he was their dad. Wolverine finds out after his connection to the mongrels, and despite the fact that they were the ones who attacked him, Wolverine ends up feeling pretty guilty about it. Number 8, Morlocks. So later on, we find out that Sabretooth actually may have been involved in the mutant massacre more than we otherwise thought. Flashbacks later on in the comics reveal that Sabretooth was there during the bloodshed, happily tearing unnamed Morlocks to shreds. Yeesh. And sure, like Caliban, most Morlocks may not be known for their strength, but there is power in numbers. The Marauders were a handful of mutants who ended up being capable of obliterating hundreds and hundreds of Morlock mutants in the tunnels. And Sabretooth apparently had some more direct involvement than we originally knew when it came to this genocidal attack. So maybe he was there, maybe he wasn't. Depends on which issue you've read as to what they've dived into of the Mutant Massacre. It's kind of retconned as being more, I think, there for it later. Number 7, Bolt. Bolt pops up as Chris Bradley in the film Wolverine X-Men Origins. His character ends up suspected dead following a run-in with Victor Creed in the film. His powers were then harvested and used to help build the film's terrifying, in so many ways, version of Deadpool, aka Weapon 11. This version of Deadpool also later gets taken out by both Wolverine and Creed when the two half-brothers, in this story, that story they were half-brothers, team up to defeat him, with Victor distracting Wade just long enough for Logan to come in and decapitate him. Although, of course, he wasn't dead. Shh. Number 6, Mentalo. Back when Sabretooth was a good guy and was a leader of the rebranded X-Force team, known as Weapon X at the time, he and his team ended up taking on Mentalo. Unfortunately for them, it looked like Mentalo would actually win this fight and end up being successful in bringing back Stryker, who the team was aiming to kind of keep dead. Seeing there was no other way, Victor sacrificed himself, giving in to his baser animal instincts and losing his mind and moral compass in a berserker rage. Mentalo was caught off guard and forced to kill Victor, but this opened him up to attack from other members of the team, which ultimately led to his downfall. So although Victor did not deal the fatal blow in this fight, without his actions, Mentalo would definitely have not been defeated. So I'm going to count this as a victory for him. Also, it's his team, so I think we got to give him some credit. Number 5, John Wraith. John Wraith was killed by Victor in the film Wolverine X-Men Origins, where he is played by Will.i.am. I don't know if you forgot about that, but that's a little fact for you. In the film, Victor snaps his spine, mining his DNA for Stryker to use, and in the comics, he met his end through another animalistic foe, Helverine, the demonic possessed and soulless version of Wolverine who roams the earth wreaking havoc while Wolverine is busy in hell. In both universes, though, John Wraith is known as a powerful teleporter, which makes it impressive that Victor Creed managed to defeat him in Wolverine's Origins by anticipating where Wraith would teleport to and moving faster than John himself could actually teleport. I mean, if you grab someone's spine, they can't really teleport away from that. But you gotta be fast. Number 4, Angel. In the Ultimate Universe, Sabretooth brutally kills Angel. He cracks his skull open. Yeah. Those poor, oh so poor hollow bones. And he also smashes his face later on the ground after leaping on top of him in the Ultimatum storyline. Sabretooth then goes on to brutally brag about taking out an angel and says he'll likely go to hell for this. I mean, he'll likely go to hell for a lot of things, I think, at that point. He even goes so far to tear off one of Angel's wings as he's bleeding out. Fortunately, Hawkeye manages to get some revenge for the fallen hero, shooting Sabretooth right in the eye with an arrow in Ultimatum number 4. Of course, Sabretooth is just like, ow, because he can kind of regenerate, but, you know, still, something. Number 3, Gambit. In Uncanny X-Men, it is revealed that Gambit was actually part of the plot to take out the Morlocks during the events of the Mutant Massacre, but was forced to do so because of a pact with Mr. Sinister. In the end, Gambit actually refuses to take part in the massacre after helping the Marauders to get to the Morlocks' hideout. It's Sabretooth who reprimands him for being unable to follow through, apparently beating Gambit until he was on the brink of death, which we find out in issue 350 during a flashback seen through the eyes of Rogue, who had just kissed Gambit. So, you know, she's like having his memories and she's like, oh my goodness. Gambit only managed to save a young Marrow as well as just barely saving himself. Number 2, Psylocke. When you usually think of strong villains, you tend to think that their weakness normally lies within the realm of psionic heroes or mutants. But with Sabretooth, although Jean has handily disabled him in an instant, he isn't completely helpless when it comes to those with psionic abilities. When he finds his way into the X-Mansion in issue 213 of Uncanny X-Men, one of the mutants that he runs into is Psylocke, and while he doesn't full-on defeat her as Storm and Wolverine come to her rescue, Sabretooth gets pretty close to ripping her throat out. Apparently his psychic defenses are strong enough to block her Psybolts, and she is only able to probe his mind while he's distracted by fighting Wolverine. Also, for some reason, a lot of people count this as a victory for Psylocke, but without her fellow X-Men coming to her defense, I don't see how she actually would be able to take Sabretooth alone. So I don't know why we consider that a win for her. Number 1, Wolverine. Yeah, you guessed it, you knew he was going to be on here. Sabretooth has brutally beaten Wolverine on numerous occasions. He literally does it every year on Wolverine's birthday. Wolverine himself has even suggested in his own comic book commentary bubbles that he believes Victor is actually more powerful than him. The difference between these two characters is where Victor seems to hold the upper hand a lot of the times. Sabretooth as a villain often has no problem with kicking a man when he's down. He's sadistic and gives into the cruelty of his animal nature. Wolverine sometimes fights to hold back giving into his berserker rage, whereas Sabretooth's berserker rage seems to be kind of a permanent state of being for him. In the end, it's often Victor's bloodlust and ruthlessness that leave him coming out on top. At least when the two of those guys are fighting. Against other people, not always. Number 10, Caliban. During the mutant massacre, Sabretooth may have not been with the Marauders, massacring as many Morlocks as possible, but he shows up in X-Factor in a different part of the tunnels going after Caliban. The X-Men show up and think that they've disabled him, running to help the Morlocks from being brutally slaughtered. But Sabretooth was only pretending to be KO'd. He comes to and proceeds to continue to go after and threaten Caliban. Number 9, Deadpool. This fight happened in the 2016 run of Deadpool issue number 9. These two end up fighting because Wade thinks that Victor was actually responsible for killing his parents, even though he himself was the one responsible for killing his parents. He was sent to kill them to test his loyalty after his mind had been wiped so much he didn't really remember they were his parents. He set their house on fire. It's a really sad issue. Anyways, with both characters having strong regenerative healing factors, it could have been anyone's fight. But in the end, Sabretooth pushes Deadpool out into the road where he is hit by a car, and he decides to give up on the fight, urging the family in the car to just keep driving with him on the hood. And yeah, I know, Deadpool is a mutate, but I'm bumping him up to an honorary mutant just for the purpose of this list. Also, for someone who is so badass, Wade loses like a lot of fights, even within his own series. So like 50%, maybe not 50%, but at least 40% of the fights in his series, he's losing. Number 8, North Star. When Wolverine found himself being brainwashed and basically mind-controlled by the Hand, he was sent on a mission to prove himself by eliminating Kitty Pryde. While attempting to pounce on her, claws drawn, Kitty phased, causing Logan to go through her, and his claws thereby to go through the mutant behind her, North Star. Ouch, poor Jean-Paul. He got beaten just being a bystander. He wasn't even a target in this one. You know it's impressive when Logan can take out a pretty powerful mutant just by accidentally taking them out. Number 7, John Howlett Jr. John is Wolverine's brother in an alternate universe and comes from the series Wolverine: The End, which takes place on Earth 4011. His power set is similar to his brother James Howlett and includes a regenerative healing factor. He is known by the aliases Kitsunebi, White Ghost, and X. Wolverine was forced to fight John when it was revealed that he had a plot to take over Las Vegas. Both were relatively old at this point, and following an electric explosion during a fight, Wolverine accidentally stabbed John through the chest, fatally wounding him. John's healing factor was too slow and worn down at this point to allow him to regenerate his organs in time. John forgave Wolverine as he lay dying and confessed that he was glad that it had ended this way, and he was actually really proud of his brother. Aww. Sad. I love when people are in the middle of a fight and then they reconcile everything as they're dying. This all could have been resolved if you had a conversation about how much you loved each other. Number 6, the Vaporizer. In the Ultimate Universe, Wolverine was sent to take out a nameless teenage mutant who has the power to vaporize any living tissue in his vicinity in issue number 41 of Ultimate X-Men. This mutant's powers were so powerful and uncontrollable that the boy found himself vaporizing a whole town of people without even completely realizing that he was doing it. He killed over 250 people by accident. Wolverine finds him hiding in a cave and has a talk with him about the risk that he poses to both humans and mutants alike. This mutant doesn't just lose to Wolverine, he surrenders. Despite how powerful the young boy was, this non-battle proved that sometimes all one needs to defeat an enemy is a six-pack of beer and a brutally honest conversation. Number 5, Mystique. While Mystique might not be strong in the traditional sense, she is a very powerful mutant. Her shape-shifting abilities allow her to pull off all kinds of tricks, both in and out of combat, and she is insanely wily as a result. Wolverine was sent to track Mystique down and take her out by Cyclops. In issue 65 of Wolverine Volume 3, we see these two have a final showdown in the desert. Mystique actually manages to put up a pretty good fight in this comic, using guns and grenades to hold Wolverine at bay, but eventually she succumbs to too many stab wounds during their fight. Wolverine, of course, just eventually heals himself. Despite defeating her and leaving Mystique weak enough that it would be possible for Wolverine to just take Raven out right there, he chooses to leave her bleeding out in the desert with a loaded gun, claiming that she knows what it's for. Ooh, that is dark. He's like, I'm not like you can use this gun. And I'm like, Wolverine, you kill people all the time, dude. What you talking about? You got some similarities there, I think. Number 4, the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club is basically one of the big bads of the X-Men world. They are an organization of criminal and mutant masterminds who aim to weigh the scales in the mutants' favor when it comes to world domination. That's right, they want to take over the world like most mutant bad guys do. They also dress like they're from Victorian England because, well, I guess they can. But despite their appearances, they still have some fairly strong members and a bunch of minions loyal to them. So don't think that just because they look ridiculous in their Victorian England dress that they are ridiculous, because they're not. But despite having an army of loyal members, this wasn't enough to stop Wolverine. In Uncanny X-Men issue 133, Wolverine takes down their entire brigade, all on his own, in an attempt to save the rest of the X-Men, who found themselves captured by them. Embarrassingly for Cyclops, while Wolverine takes on pretty much the entire Hellfire Club's army of minions, Scott struggles to take on Mastermind by himself in a fight on the astral plane. Wow. Keep up here, bub. Number 3, Cyclops. I know what you're thinking, so wait a minute, Amanda, doesn't Cyclops usually beat Wolverine? Well, you're right, he usually does beat Wolverine. However, there have been a few occasions where Wolverine has come out on top. One, in the 90s animated cartoon, there is a scene where Wolverine fights Cyclops, except it isn't really Cyclops, it ends up just being a robot, as Cyclops at the time is getting married to Jean Grey. However, Wolverine does best this simulation of Cyclops, which is pretty impressive, even though it's just a simulation. And number 2, there is a time when Wolverine comes very, very close to basically killing Cyclops, in my opinion, and that would be in X-Men Schism. At the end of X-Men Schism number 4, we actually see that Wolverine is just about to finish off Cyclops, claws drawn, about to smash him right in the face with those claws. We pick up on X-Men Schism number 5, and the two continue to fight. It seems that Cyclops is basically blasting Wolverine down to bones, but the cool thing about this is that Wolverine is still intact. Although he doesn't have a lot of flesh on him, he's still actually able to fight Scott. And he actually probably would have finished them if it wasn't for Hope coming in and defending them from the Sentinel that's about to basically, well, kill both of them at that point. Still, if they'd continued, I'm telling you, those claws would have gone right into Cyclops' eyes, right into his head, and he'd be dead. Number 2, Gorgon. These two faced off in Wolverine Volume 3, Issue 31 during the Enemy of the State story arc. Gorgon is known for being a fearsome villain who can, as his codename implies, turn enemies to stone with one simple glance. In fact, Gorgon has actually successfully killed Wolverine before. That's just how even of a match he and Wolverine are. He then had Wolverine resurrected and brainwashed him so that he might use him as his own assassin, turning him against his friends and colleagues in the hero community. In the end, though, Wolverine got him back, and he got him back good. During their fight in issue 31, Wolverine seems to take a page out of Perseus's book. He defeats Gorgon using his own claws to reflect his own gaze back unto himself, turning Gorgon into stone before shattering him into a million pieces. Number 1, X-24. We gotta occasionally go cinematic when talking about Wolverine, and though we've already talked about Wolverine vs. Wolverine on the part 1 of this list, that was an alternate version of Wolverine himself in the comics, and this is a cloned, younger, more durable version of him from the same universe in the film Logan. Geez, I love this film. If you have time to rewatch this film, go do it, it's so good. Wolverine takes on X-24 more than once in the film, and although he has help in defeating him, regardless, it's still a fight worth mentioning, as X-24 was stated by Hugh Jackman to be like Wolverine, but in a permanent berserker rage, which is terrifying. That's like an unstoppable version of Wolverine, but he stopped it. It's also impressive to see an old and rundown Logan even manage to take on X-24, even with the assistance of Laura, aka X-23, and her friends. And sure, Logan himself died in the end, but really only at the cost of helping to actually take out X-24.